Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited by this session. Thank you so much for doing all the hard work. So the way this is going to work is we've got our students here who have put together their own education manifesto, and they're going to start by presenting that. And then in a bit of a twist, I think after they're finished, we'll get some reactions from the participants first, so that you don't pollute their thinking. And then we'll move on to the panel. Is that all right? So I'll let you get on.
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Beer. I'm Deputy Head of Bootham School, which is just a stone's throw that way here in York. And delighted to bring 4 students who took part in our bicentenary conference. It's our bicentenary as a school, 200th anniversary, and we wanted to create a space where people could meet together, young people could meet together, and think about the purpose of education and think about the future of education. And that's what we did. This time last week, we were meeting together, about 150 people in the room, of which 120 were lower 6th or year 12 students from across the world. So we had 30 different schools represented, 9 different countries, the vast majority from the United Kingdom of those students, and from the state and the independent sectors, grappling with the issues that are around and the challenges that are around in terms of education and how can education create a better world. We had a program as part of that, but the purpose was for them to bring their ideas together and their discussions together to synthesize into some kind of call to action and some kind of manifesto for change. 4 of the 120 delegates are going to represent that voice just this morning, and I'll introduce them to you and then hand over to them to give you the most important points that they felt came from the conference last week. So they are Maya Lindridge and Finn Taylor from Bootham School, and Matt Dalgleish from Archbishop Holgate's, and Seth Roodhouse from All Saints School. Over to them now. And just before I do that, you'll have noticed the artwork that's been produced. This is a visual representation of the discussions they had, and it may well be that we come back to that when we get into the question and answer. But you can see various different threads and themes that the young people themselves will elucidate a little bit more just now.
It won't surprise you to know that education matters to young people. We live it, it shapes us, and also the future it is preparing us for. We're both its subject and its product. We're the biggest stakeholders in all of it, but we rarely get asked to comment on it or think about it, let alone shape it.
In the pursuit of a better world, the 120 aforementioned young minds gave up a beautiful sun-kissed Saturday, infusing their intellects, hearts, energy and boundless imaginations into unravelling the question, how can education create a better world?
It won't surprise you either that the thoughts, priorities and ideas of 120 young people are not easy to distill into one A4 piece of paper, but they have been distilled and we are here today to present them to you. We are setting out to put together a manifesto of ideas and policies we urge you to consider. The starting point for this has been to synthesize the output of all 15 groups.
The emphasis and recurring themes of this output have been condensed into a call for action to all those responsible for or interested in the way schools work, or people that are affected by the policy. That is what we want to present briefly today. With ongoing work and time, we will formulate something more closely resembling a manifesto in the weeks ahead.
The foundation for our call to action is a belief that there appears to be little articulated vision for the ultimate goal of our education that extends beyond how it benefits each individual student. However important this is, and it is, we would like to propose something more. That education must value what it does through the individual for the communities they are part of, as much as it values what it does for that individual. Not to do so is missing the point. The words of one of the groups have been adapted only slightly to speak for all at the conference as a vision for a renewed goal for education throughout the world. We believe that the goal of education should be to equip all young people with the tools, chiefly knowledge, skills, and mindsets they need to achieve their full potential, and by doing so create a better world for all.
Our first call to action is not a request, but a challenge to you all. To grant young people a genuine voice in discussions regarding our own education, and crucially, the education system of generations to come. We possess a unique understanding of the current system, an understanding that holds immeasurable value and yet often goes unrecognised. We harbour dreams, concerns, and innovative ideas about the uncertain future that lies ahead. But we find ourselves lacking a platform to express them effectively or have them truly heard. We refuse to accept the notion that the status quo is the best there can be. We, the youth, should have the right to question, comprehend, challenge, and ultimately transform the system. In fact, we believe that young people should actively be encouraged to do so. Let our voices resound, not with defiance, but with a passionate determination to shape a better future. Together, we can create an education system that embraces change, values diverse perspectives, and empowers the very individuals it serves.
Our second call to action is a big one and follows from Finn's point. We would call for the convening of a national, even international conversation about the future of education. A commission on education to be set up to ask and answer the same question that we have started to wrestle with. How can education create a better world? Not just for individuals, but through each individual, for the communities they belong to, local, national, and global. It is a conversation that needs to be inclusive, bringing in voices from all backgrounds and experiences. It needs to reach across cultures and borders and across generations. It needs to get beyond the usual pragmatic and dogmatic restrictions of party politics. It needs to think radically, and it needs to listen, especially to those of us who will be the citizens and even the leaders of the future that it is preparing us for. And it needs to make changes.
There are three elements of that conversation and for that commission that emerged most clearly from our discussions last week. The first of those is about the emphasis and the priorities of the curriculum. If our education is going to equip us to create a better world, we will need to develop adaptability, that ability to respond successfully to the new challenges that will emerge for our generation, such as the challenges AI has presented in recent months. We know that gaining knowledge is vital. Skills cannot be developed without it. We accept there will need to be qualification structure to give all young people the currency they will need for higher education and employment. But we would wish to find ways of integrating key skills more obviously into our curriculum. In particular, we believe as a conference that we need to help develop critical thinking skills to enable us to figure out what information we can trust and what we cannot, and to help us solve problems we will face. Skills such as collaborative working and the ability to communicate effectively will be vital. We need resilience to face the challenges ahead of us.
The second key element to this conversation came out very loudly from our discussion, helped in part by the input of 21-year-old activist Phoebe Hanson. The climate emergency is the biggest issue facing our generation. It scares us greatly, and several recent studies underline this. It is not our problem to solve, but we have to play a role in doing so. And we don't know how to go about it. The young people who met at Bootham School last week call for prioritising the addressing of the climate emergency within our curriculum. We need expertise to help us understand the science and complexity of it better than we have at the moment. We need support, and we need a voice, a seat at the table. We will find ourselves at the forefront as we face this issue, so we need to be as well prepared as we possibly can be.
The third vital element we insist on incorporating into the Commission's work holds real significance to us. We are a generation that champions inclusivity. We're not happy living in our own silos. We find no solace in secluded existences. What we want and need is to have meaningful encounters with individuals whose life experiences diverge vastly from our own. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us like never before just how useful technology can be to forge these connections. When we build these connections, we're able to amplify the voice of those who are often marginalized and overlooked. Education cannot be blinkered or focused on the individual. Education needs a global perspective capable of fostering a global impact. Our aspirations must extend beyond individual and personal gratification. To enable this, we need to recalibrate the priorities of the education system to cultivate and embody the values that emerged as common themes during our discussions: empathy, open-mindedness, compassion, fairness, and inclusivity. These qualities are not inevitable byproducts of the system as it stands. These qualities cannot be assumed to naturally arise. They necessitate diligent cultivation and nurturing. Simply put, these qualities must be worked at.
As part of our conference's call to action, we also call ourselves and the adults who worked with us to continue this work. We want to commit to supporting this project in order to turn the principles that have emerged from our time together last week into something much more focused, something much more like the manifesto we set out to create. We will commit to spreading this discussion within the schools we represent and to meeting again as a virtual community in the new school year. We commit to speaking with those who will open doors for us, which is already beginning to happen in some quite exciting ways.
And so, the delegates to the Quaker Education Conference held at Bootham School on Saturday the 10th of June 2023 wish to present the following summary of our deliberations. We believe that the goal of our education should be to equip all young people with the tools, chiefly knowledge, skills and mindsets, they need to achieve their full potential and, through doing so, create a better world for all. We call on all those who have a responsibility for, an interest or a stake in the future of education to consider and work with us to respond to the following challenges.
We call on them to seek, listen to, and value the experiences and needs of young people, and engage with us as an essential voice in shaping future educational policy and curricula. We urge the convening of a national and international conversation to re-evaluate the true goal of education and the best ways to achieve that goal. This conversation needs to be between generations and to encourage participation from people of all backgrounds. It must not be restricted by short-term political considerations, but be prepared to think radically.
There are three issues that we have come across in the early stages of this discussion that we know demand centre stage. Firstly, the need for curricula of our schools to prepare us much more effectively for present and future participation in the local, national and global communities to which we belong. We need to be equipped and adaptable enough to create the better world we seek for ourselves and for others. Developing critical thinking, collaborative working, effective personal communication and resilience are of greatest importance to us.
Secondly, the urgent need for expert help to enable us to grasp the complexities of the climate emergency and to explore effective responses to it and develop active ways of playing our part in addressing it. Thirdly, the need for education to enable us and encourage us all to be open to others whose experiences are very different from our own. To do that, we need to be provided with opportunities to actively engage with people, places, and cultures beyond our own experience. We also need those responsible for our schools to understand that empathy, open-mindedness, compassion, fairness, and inclusivity are the most important values for us to explore and develop as a priority.
We commit ourselves to continue to develop the knowledge, ideas, policies, and determination within ourselves and our schools to bring more detailed solutions to the issues that concern us, and to live lives ourselves that serve to create a better world. We commit to taking action in order to promote this vision and answer our own call to bring about positive change in our education systems. And we call on you to help to do the radical thinking and thus make changes that are needed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Well done. Great food for thought. And I'm glad that you all want to see radical change. Let's see who's got the stomach for that. Any comments from the floor before we turn to the panel?
Wow, I wish I'd had the chance to teach you when I was still working and to learn with you. I think that's the important thing. You are the important people in the classrooms. Where to start? I think as Quakers, it would be good for your education to look at the climate justice course that's going on. Have you come across that? It's an online course from Woodbrook College, and I think it would take you perhaps beyond your fear about climate to what we need to fight for, which is justice, and you've talked a lot about that. And I'm wondering how you're going to take this forward in York. You talked a lot about national and international. I found myself wondering about, schools in, kids less privileged perhaps than you, and how you're going to reach out to other schools around the York area. Thank you.
Just briefly, so 2 of the students are from Bootham School, the Quaker school, but 2 of the students are from other York schools. And one of the ways that the conference looked to engage was engaging with as many schools as we could in the local area and the regional area. So that's part of that.
I mean, I do take your point. I think the ISSP, what does it stand for again? Independent State School Partnership. That's it. It's so that there is a great opportunity for how I think Bootham likes to work with other schools, and we all try to work for something better. And I think the conference has been another great thing where loads and loads of schools have gotten together, and we've all heard voices and carrying it forwards. I think continuing working with ISSP, doing psychology, astronomy, classics, Latin, all of these things has been a great way that we've been able to work with other groups of people and pull us all together into one more unified thing. Because I think if there's anything the world needs right now, it's unity.
Great, thank you. Let's turn to people in the panel. I couldn't help noticing in your wonderful drawing that you wanted education to be exciting and interesting and motivating. Rachel, we've kind of converted education to what I call a joyless exam factory. Is there any way of getting out of that?
Yeah, and I really want to thank the young people for their contribution. I thought it was so inspiring, and the sort of ambition, the articulateness, the wisdom in there, just far more than we see from our political leaders. We've had 10 education secretaries in 10 years, and you guys have come up with a better plan in your summit. I thought it was really, and what was so interesting to me is so much of what you said chimed with what we heard. I chaired the Education Commission for the Times. And we spent a year speaking to all ages, all kinds of people, business leaders, artistic figures, scientists, and we had a pupil panel as well and parent panel. Talked to a few politicians too, but about what needs to change. And the message that came across to us was almost exactly the same, that this kind of exam-focused thing just wasn't preparing young people for the world they're going to come out into. That with the rise of AI and the rise of these new issues that cut across traditional subjects, we just have to rethink how and what people learn, and that there needs to be much more focus on those kind of empathy, the human skills, if you like, which the robots aren't going to be able to take. And I thought that I wanted to draw out a couple of things that I thought was so wise in your think of outrage as currency, spend it wisely. To say that, that's so much of what we see in the kind of adult political dialogue is driven by outrage, and to have that kind of understanding is so important. So I think there are ways of, we came up with some recommendations, including things like reform of the assessment system, to have a baccalaureate, so sort of broader education, but also to have more human skills sort of woven through the curriculum, so that you're preparing better for the workplace and for life. What was so interesting to me is that actually the polling we did among voters was that 2/3 of people think that the education system isn't preparing young people for work or life. So there is a kind of political opportunity here, I think, a pitch that you can make to the politicians to change, and that there is a reason why they ought to do it. And I think there's an appetite. We had an education summit last week with about 200 people in the Times building, with politicians from all parties, and there is an appetite for change. So I think if you can keep banging the drum, it would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Well, most of us can sit around and think about education, but I guess, Bob, you're more involved in actually having to deliver something.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, what the world looks like from your perspective, with all the constraints put on you if you try to achieve some change.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm Bob Webb. I'm a city councillor for York, for Heworth Ward, which for anyone who lives here is just out of the walls that way. If you're not from York, welcome to York. And I've recently become the executive member for Cllr young people and education. But I think it's worth declaring an interest here in the fact that I'm also a maths physics teacher. So yes, I'm part of the joyless exam factory. That's a sad state of affairs, but that's who I am. And what I would say first is that education, there is a huge focus at the moment on terminal assessments and on that final high-stakes judgment, which is just not appropriate for so many young people. And I was reading some of the report the Commission put together, and there was something in there about that baccalaureate, but particularly about moving most of the assessment up to 18, for example, and there being a reduced offer at 16. And, I've had the privilege of working in York schools for over 10 years now, and I work in a state school in York, and we have young people from all backgrounds in our school. And by that, I mean ethnic diversity, but probably most importantly, there's a difference in economic diversity. We have people who are very affluent in York, that's obviously the case, but we also have some people in real poverty. And the curriculum is not built for people who do not have what they like to call cultural capital, for example. And this comes through to things like you'll have exam paper questions which rely on a certain knowledge of foods, for example, that a lot of our young people just don't have access to. So I really think that there is a huge thing that we can do here in this country, because I think you're right that people do recognise that we're not in a good place right now and that education isn't where it needs to be. And you have got the appetite from young people. We've heard that today brilliantly. You've got the appetite from the teaching profession itself. Just listen to what all of our National Education Union colleagues are telling us right now. But what we need to keep trying. And I think it's things like this that really help. We need to keep talking to each other. And as the local on the panel, I think it's really worth extending the invitation right here and now that I want to be part of this going forward, and I want to be involved in this conversation because I think there's some really good things that could come out of it. And I'm happy to help however I can, because it's not perfect right now. It's a lot better for some people who are maybe from more affluent backgrounds than it is for a lot of our population in York. And I want to make sure that we're working for everybody. And I'd love to hear the voice of that community as well. I think that really needs to feed in too. But I'm happy to help and work with you as much as we can.
Great. So I'm wondering just how trapped we are in our way of thinking, although we talk about radical things. So, switching from A-levels to a baccalaureate might broaden things, but it's still stuck in the mindset that we have to have an exam at the end of it. And when you say we need to change the curriculum, should we have a curriculum? Is a question. Why can't each young man or young woman put their own curriculum together, and we can offer them the choices? So I just wonder how radical we really, how much we're trapped in our way of thinking. Let me pass on to you and see what the RSA thinks about this.
Thank you. Is this working okay? Yeah, okay. I'm Patrick Hurley. I'm the North of England manager for the RSA. Those of you who are of a certain generation may remember doing your RSA exams, do your typing skills exams. And the younger ones amongst us, the R in OCR exam board is at the RSA. So we are also partly to blame for the joyless exams that you all sadly have to do. We can be incredibly radical. We live in an age where education is extending into early adulthood. In that context, why are GCSEs still mandatory? If you want to be radical, let's abolish GCSEs. If you want to be radical even further, take a leaf out of the corporate playbook and say, maybe 10, 15 years ago, Google had this concept within its corporate culture that every Friday was given over to something that the employees wanted to work on. That was just innovative, that was just whatever they came up with. And they were given 20% of their working time devoted to something which might turn out to be nothing at all or might turn out to be world-changing. Schools could do something similar. Is that too radical? Is that something that perhaps you could incorporate? I'm really taken with what Bob said about the cultural capital. I'm upwardly mobile. I grew up in what was, by some accounts, the most deprived local authority in England, Knowsley. And then I moved to the second most deprived local authority area. So I'm well aware that people that I grew up with and I live with, and I'm still, in the same neighborhood and community, are missing out on opportunities. And they're missing out on opportunities they don't even realize are there. They don't even realize that they're missing out. And I think that there's something around how can people reach across economic barriers, diversity barriers, and class barriers. It's one thing that we don't talk enough about, I think, is the class issue.
Good. Well, we seem to have heard that there's consensus that the system needs to change quite radically. Everybody seems to agree, but nothing happens. So, what are the blocks to change? Natalie, maybe you can have a view on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. So firstly, just to echo what everybody has said, I think this is a great piece of work that you have been working on with other students from across York, and a real testament to your engagement and, as Rachel said, your wisdom as well. And there's a lot there that has real currency with the national debate as well. So is our curriculum broad and balanced enough? Well, we know that we have, by international standards, one of the narrowest curriculums post-16 in particular. So Rachel and the Commission's idea to have a longer term baccalaureate, actually there's a lot of merit and consideration that should be given to that. Concerns about climate change, we hear a lot of young people, that's kind of top 3, if not number 1 on their list for change. And the idea that there needs to be greater breadth of skills and not just a focus on the kind of academic core is something that also resonates in Westminster, where I work, for example. So you've really identified the key challenges, I think, in the education system. But because there is consensus on this panel, I thought I might pose a bit of challenge for you guys to go away and think about. So firstly, you talked a lot about we want this from schools and education. But actually, how much of this should schools be required to deliver 100%? And how much should we also think about the role of parents, family, community, health service, welfare, housing, the voluntary and charity sector as well? We cannot expect schools to, in isolation, create well-rounded, happy, articulate young people who are fulfilling their potential. It has to be, and you talked about it at the beginning, you talked about education for the community, not just for the individual. I think that's really important. The second thing that I might slightly push back on is I know we've caricatured it a bit, but the kind of the exam factory and the joyless nature of exams. So we did some work during the COVID pandemic when GCSE and A-levels were cancelled. And ahead of 2021 and 2022, when government was still nervous about whether exams should go ahead, we did some focus groups with young people. And actually, most of them, of our focus groups, wanted exams to happen. They wanted an opportunity to prove that this is what they had learned, and as you talked about, to have some currency at the end of secondary or post-16 study. And for physics teachers out there, my son's doing A-level physics. He's finding it anything other than joyless. He loves it. Maybe he's an outlier, but we shouldn't underestimate the joy that teachers bring as well. And, you know, I don't think schools are just this black hole of joy on the whole. I think there's lots that we should be celebrating. And the third point, to just again highlight what Bob talks about, is inequality. And you talked about listening to the voice of young people. But we know that the poorest young people leave secondary school over 18 months behind their peers. And that gap is bigger for Black Caribbean pupils, for pupils with special educational needs and disability. So when you're convening, when you're presenting, think about taking into account the views and needs and wishes of those pupils as well, because they've got the biggest mountains to climb. So, but overall, this is really great, and I'm so excited to see it.
Excellent, thank you. Madam.
My name's Sarah Dyer. I'm a parent of children and was first exposed to some of the curricula at schools during the pandemic and was quite shocked by kind of what my primary age children were learning. I'm also an educator myself. I work at Manchester University, where I'm Associate Dean in the Faculty of Humanities. And I think, I mean, amazing, thank you, really, really wonderful work. I wanted to say, I think it would be interesting to think about the connection with universities as well, because these are absolutely the conversations we're having at universities that we're struggling with. I'm leading a group thinking about assessment in the age of AI at the moment at the university. So they're kind of exactly the kinds of conversations we're thinking about, and it'd be really interesting to think about kind of how to kind of connect with those conversations as well. And a real shout out to the Design Council, because I think that they could be really useful to you in this. My sense is that the tools of design are going to be really fundamental, really kind of powerful in thinking about how do we solve these really complex, knotty problems about how we do education, both in terms of the skills that we teach young people, because actually one of the problems that I see in education is that we're teaching looking backwards, and actually all of the problems you're going to face are in the future and we don't know what they are yet. So actually those design skills about working with complex, unknown, ill-defined problems that designers work with all the time are going to be really important skills, and I'd really encourage you to go and talk to the Design Council in thinking about kind of your next stages. But yeah, just thank you, because I think it's a fantastic piece of work you're doing, and it's just those opportunities to think and talk about education are really important. We kind of swim in this stream, but there are many other streams. We could reinvent that stream, and kind of the conversations that first start. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Simon.
I mean, two things. One is it's brilliant. And if you ever want new work experience, any of you, get in touch with me. It'd be fantastic. The second thing, following on a little bit from the previous question, is we have to look forward. AI is a thing. Most of the jobs that we have in my business will evolve really rapidly in the next 2 or 3 years, away from process and stuff. So creativity, empathy, strategy. These are the 3 key tenets of any future career that isn't going to be automated. So, the way that you've outlined it here is absolutely right. Very, very good presentations, very, very good content. I would suggest that everybody looks at a state school in Doncaster called the XP Academy. Within the constraints of the state education system, they have achieved an awful lot of what you've been talking about today. They don't have lessons, they don't have subjects, but they get past. They have expeditions, they don't have classes, they have crews. And the first thing that they do when they come into the school is have a week away with that class, with that group of people, outward bounds, to get to know the person that they're working alongside. It's a completely radically different but more cost effective, they have a lower cost per pupil, a very effective outcomes. I mean, Tim and I went round together, and the quality of interaction that we have with the pupils was exactly the kind of stuff that you're doing. And yet they come out with good qualifications, yet they achieve the life skills that we need. So I think, you know, we self-impose a boundary that isn't necessarily there. And XP Academy in Doncaster is a fantastic example of people being able to be creative within the state education system.
Thank you. Astrid.
Thank you. Thank you all. That's so exciting and encouraging, and I love your artwork. And like you said, art is so important. And I'm Astrid Vargas, I'm from Spain, and I'm the founder of an initiative called Inspiration for Action. And within that initiative, I'm part of an alliance. It's called the Alliance for a Regenerative Education. And what we're doing is we use the land and the landscape as an educational resource. So we learn as we change our reality with our own hands. So children, adults, all sorts of ages go out and restore the landscape. You learn about climate change, you learn about biodiversity loss, which is actually the crisis of all crises, the loss of life, which is worse even than what's happening with the climate, although it's all interrelated. And what I wanted to offer is two things. One, you wanted to create an international community. So there's people in other countries also thinking what you're thinking and trying to change it. And then about a framework that we have. We have three axes on education. The soul, our inner selves. We are not taught at school how to really restore our souls when we're sad, how to listen to people. So we start by listening. It's so important that we learn at school to listen, and also how to speak. Nonviolent communication is essential in all this education. We haven't heard that part, but soul, and then our community. So we educate, we talk about, it should be a community education. It's not only at schools, it's in the class, it's in the townships and municipalities, and then the landscape. Using the landscape as an educational resource is very important. So inner self, community, and the environment where we live is a good framework to think about education too.
Thank you. Martin.
First, thank you very much. It was one of the best articulated visions, and I would say, go and do it. Do not go and wait, because we will be dead. And so it's your world. Point that I have, first I'd say, what is the role of education? Is it just a factory for employees? And I'd say not. To your point, Natalie, absolutely. If you simplify it, it's a pie chart. Parenting is a huge impact. So is the media. So is peer-to-peer learning. And any conversation around education must include them. I'd have each of that changes human behavior. The other part on that is what we're doing in our 30s, 40s, 50s. It's how our subconscious was formed in ages 0 to 6. How much of our focus in budget and time and energy is going to those years, because after that, less impact. And then really what I've not heard today is lifelong learning. As the lady said here, we don't know where the future will hold. All we know that it's not going to be like today. So how can we bring people to love learning? And that's something I've worked in education in Asia, Middle East. They are already, this is the holistic. And very simply, they said the biggest stresses in life, relationships and financial. We will teach our children, and we will teach every human in our country about how to get rid of those stresses, because then they'll have the heart space or the time space to actually be, and they even know how many hospital nights, 36% less hospital nights if you found meaning in your life, 27% less likely of dying if you feel meaning in your life. And so they know how much money they'll make, and they'll equate. And there, I'd just say, you're going to be working in a global talent pool, and from working overseas, they're ahead. And so I would take responsibility. It's your world. Go and live it.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Let's turn. Sorry?
Sorry,
question.
Go ahead.
I work as a cover teacher and a teaching assistant in primary schools, especially in kind of key stage 1 in those early years. And I think the thing that really hasn't been said so far or mildly alluded to is just money. We need more money in order to create individualized curriculums, especially for children with additional needs and for children who are coming from more deprived backgrounds. Most of the schools I'm at the moment have one teaching assistant, one support member, between 60 children, and it's just not enough. And the only way to get more skilled staff who stay in education, and also just more staff, full stop, more adults to help, is massively expanding the budgets for schools to hire those staff. I think 90%, it was then reformed, so it's not that way anymore, but 90% of schools were going to be underfunded for 2023 in the initial budget. And that's just, there needs to be a huge campaign, in my opinion, to make sure that that does not continue to be the case, because that's where a lot of crisis has come in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, everybody wants more money. I'm sure.
Can I
if we go
pop
to
in on
every,
that one?
if we go to every tent, we'll find that everybody's asking for more money.
I am going to jump in on that one, and I think that I don't disagree. Schools definitely need more money. That's a big thing. One thing we haven't mentioned at all today is the O word, Ofsted. If you work in a state school, Ofsted is the thing that is dampening down, because I think we need to come back on what we've heard today about the school system being this black hole of joy. It's really not. You know, I love teaching. It's what I think I'm passionate about it, and I've been doing it for quite a number of years now, and I see hundreds of colleagues in schools, right from the top, head teachers, all the way through to everybody in the building, right, who really want to make a love of learning the centre of what they do. But then we have a system where we're measured on test results, and we're measured on a very, very narrow, it's a very narrow test system again. And that, I think, is something that we need to discuss. I don't have a problem with there being accountability for schools. There has to be accountability. But what we've got right now is not accountability. It's punishment, and it's tampering down schools and stopping them from being the creative places that we're envisaging here today. And my final point, because I know I jumped in on that, but I was going to, is one of the points in the manifesto that you put together was about allowing young people to reach their potential. And I think that's really, really powerful. But I think the key question is, we all have in our own heads what our potential is, and we need to make sure that we're talking to everybody so that they all know what their potential is. You know, you're not just thinking about, okay, well, I want to be this person, I want to be that person, I want to do this, do that. It's actually got to be about, what do those people want to do? Can I go and ask them, what do they want to do? It's bringing people together, and that conversation is really key.
To pick up on the point, Rachel, I don't know whether you addressed the role of the regulator in your commission.
Yeah, we called for a broader assessment with a sort of school report card rather than this very narrow definition. We said that it should take into account wider criteria like well-being, culture at the school, creativity, things like that as well. And I think one of the issues is that there's this sort of fear of being seen, that reform is seen as somehow dumbing down or eroding the gold standard of A-levels or GCSEs. That's the traditionalist argument. I think what we found with the Commission, and what I'd argue, is that actually it's more stretching for young people, but also more inclusive, to draw out the talent of every child is actually not dumbing down at all. It's completely the opposite. And the system has to be able to stretch the most academically able, but also draw out the talent of those who have different forms of intelligences. There isn't just one kind of intelligence. It's the Harvard professor who said, don't ask how intelligent a child is, ask how a child is intelligent. And there are so many forms of intelligence. Howard Gardner, his name. And you look at the best education system in the OECD and in the world, in Europe, according to the OECD PISA tables, is Estonia. And I went there to find out what they were doing, and they are doing all the things you say. So they have a curriculum based on what they call 21st century competencies, which are entrepreneurship, empathy, communication skills, teamwork. They're creating people who are going to set up the unicorns of the future, and they've got the highest number of unicorns in the world by some measures. The tech companies are incredible there. They've integrated digital skills all the way through their curriculum. So I went to one school where, you know, they had robotics classes from the age of 7. The kids did chemistry and geography in virtual reality. They went to the rainforest through their headsets and, you know, saw the snakes. The teachers didn't like that bit. And they did chemistry experiments in virtual reality. They visited London in their English classes. And it's just have brought the whole system to life. They have but it's still elite, and you know, if that's the right word, it's still excellent, and it's an education that then prepares them for work. But it definitely isn't dumbing down on the sort of objective measures. It's better than our system academically, as well as in terms of these wider skills. So just to throw that in as well.
So again, I keep raising this question that everybody sees all these things happening everywhere else, and everybody says, and we need to change, and everybody has ideas about which way to go, and very little happens. So, you know, where are the blocks here? You know, what's going on? You know, everybody agrees, and nothing happens. Yes, sorry, yes, I'll come to you in a minute.
Great. I would argue that we've had 13 years now of a government that does have a fairly traditionalist viewpoint, and have put forward a very kind of knowledge-based curriculum. So Michael Gove's reforms, for example, got rid of coursework and focused on end of assessment examination in the vast majority of subjects. So I think there has been there's been a government block, quite frankly, on thinking about reforming the education system quite radically, but as Rachel said, certainly not necessarily dumbing it down. And I think also there's been a split amongst educationalists as well that's been very difficult for politicians and policymakers to navigate. So there are people on the more traditional side who are more kind of Govian in their thinking, and then there are people who are a bit more reformist and think actually there are ways that we can, you know, reform the system without dumbing it down, and trying to get consensus on that in a political time where the wider economy has taken up a lot of government time, Brexit has taken up government time, COVID has taken up government time, you know, 10 secretaries of state has taken up government time. I think all of those have prevented us from really focusing on how we create an evidence-based education policy.
Yeah, come to you in a minute. Ma'am.
The last time we challenged the gold standard, any of you who are here can remember, was Tomlinson. And we were close to an election at that time. And it was, and you know, we're at the point now where we could make changes. I really hope that we learn from that time when we stepped back. We didn't want to challenge the gold standard. And is it a gold standard anymore? My name's Dr. Dyer, and my background is education, and I wrote my thesis on how university technical colleges were hampered by the narrowing of the curriculum in response to what was happening. The narrowing of the curriculum and the reduction of critical thinking skills is scandalous. It is scandalous. And I take my hat off to you guys who are saying, it is scandalous. We know it is, and we want to do something about it. And I really hope you can, because we need to rethink things. Scandinavia has open qualifications that you can use your searching and thinking skills to pass your exams. The curriculum is not fit for purpose. Manchester is looking at an MBAC. The mayor there is now looking at a different way of looking at skills. I do question the idea of the baccalaureate, because the baccalaureate traditionally has been something for those students who are good across the board, which is also the 8 general GCSEs, English, Maths, Science, the 3 sciences, the humanities subjects. So I think there's a new visioning, and I think it's absolutely the right time, and I really welcome you doing it. But I think we're going to, given the past and the challenging of the gold standard and the move away from GCSEs and A-levels and summative assessment, the challenge will be incredibly strong. And so the fight I don't see it as a fight, but I think opening up those debates and really pushing against that and thinking about what we need for the future is absolutely right for now. So thank you to everybody.
Thanks. One more question at the back, or comment, or?
Hello, my name's Maxine. I was thinking about that question about how we make things change. And I was thinking about, we all have the power to do small radical acts, and getting up on the stage and talking about your ideas, or standing here with a microphone is a small radical act. A couple of years ago, when there was the Manchester bombing, a school nearby us said to all the children, "This is a horrible thing that's happened, and you can spend all day playing." Small radical action. And I think those little small radical actions and the idea of playing with things are the way forward.
That's great. Thank you. Patrick, let me bring you in a minute, because we've heard a lot of that there are individual schools and the recommendation, just get on and do it, don't wait for government and all this sort of thing. Like your take on this idea of, just get on with it, as opposed to saying we can't do anything until the government changes the world.
Yeah, I think it would be wonderful if we could just get on with things without the blockages in place. We have to acknowledge, though, that government sometimes, and the Department for Education and all of the institutions are there, have to be dealt with, and in many ways they are institutionally timid. They do not want to be radical. They do not want this change. So perhaps the way to instigate the change that we've talked about here and that we've all kind of agreed might be necessary is to make the path towards that radicalism the easy path for government to take. The lady in the audience talked about the MBAC, the Manchester Baccalaureate. Well, if that can be the kind of the light that shines the way for national government to say, oh, well, they're doing some good work in Manchester. Why don't we take a look and see what's going on there? And individual schools doing likewise. There could be recommendations from commissions that would make a difference around the edges. But yeah, individual schools, individual academies. The Doncaster example could be something which people can take inspiration from. The gentleman talked, I think it was it, I can't remember, purpose you mentioned, sir? And in the mural we have something that says about solutions-based. And we could say that a mission-based or a mission-driven education system and schooling system could be something to be looked at, rather than just being judged on exam results and on the kind of the conveyor belt into industry or into jobs. The Quaker ethos and the kind of the history of radicalism there in industry, maybe that's something to be learned on and take inspiration from the past. Take that ethos, take those values, say how can they be applied in the 2020s and 2030s, and what can you do to instill those values in our young people rather than just come out with A-star grades.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're coming to the end of our time. Quite right, of course, that institutions and governments are risk averse. And I guess we should hold our hands up for that, in that we're all too ready to criticize whenever government does something. I don't know if I've ever seen a headline that says, government tried something radical, it failed, but hey, well done for trying. We don't see those headlines, so we make governments and institutions risk averse, and I think we should take some of the blame for that. thank you again once more for your input. A lot of these things are, of course, end up essentially being political decisions. And one of the things that I didn't hear in your manifesto, and maybe it's something that you have discussed, but you didn't have time to talk about, is how do we get more young people to participate in the political process?
I'd say there was a lot of talk about how things end up as talk and not actually getting things done. And what I would really like to say is that I think part of the problem there is that when students come along and they say how they feel and what they want to see done, we get told it's inspiring, and then the adults talk for an hour. And I think if you want to get more students involved in these kinds of things, it needs to be a full discussion as opposed to... I think what we did here today was great, but I think going forward, the way to get students involved is to give them a proper voice and let them discuss with the adults as opposed to present to adults and then have the adults discuss between themselves.
Yeah. I want to end off with kind of one last analogy question, which is, when was the last time anyone saw a biplane in modern usage? Not someone having an old collector, but actually being used. Because for years, the biplane was all there was, and someone suggested, what if we made a plane with one set of wings? And the Royal Flying Corps said, no, that is stupid. You can't have a plane with a single set of wings. It'll fall out of the sky. And they outlawed it. This was a blockage, and I think it was de Havilland, but I may be wrong, made one anyway. And they were fined for this, and they kept flying it, and everyone saw, oh, the one-wing plane does fly. So maybe these blockages are only as bad as we let them be. If we know that we can do something else, why are we letting these blockages stop us? I mean, you talked about politicians and government being key, but we've had how many secretaries of education? We've had how many secretaries of state? We've had just as many failures. Why are we still listening to them? Because there is always another route around, like the MBAC, like all of these things. There is a backdoor route, there is a route around. Blockages are only as bad as you let them be. And I think we're tired of letting these blockages stop us.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. Thank you all on the panel. And I'll let you get on to the next panel, whenever it is.